The pencil trembled slightly in Lieutenant George Grider's grip. His hand moved across the page with deliberate care. Each word carried weight beyond its meaning. The date stared back at him from the logbook. January 26, 1943. The coordinates followed in precise notation. Arrow 2 degrees, Alidru minutes north. 0 degrees, 0 minutes east. 139 degrees, 33 minutes east. North of New Guinea's steaming coastline. The words he wrote would echo through decades of naval history. They would haunt military academies and war colleges. They would spark debates in congressional hearings and international courts. The captain has ordered all weapons to fire on the boats. This moment defied everything they had learned about submarine warfare. Through the narrow viewing glass of the periscope, Commander Dudley Walker Morton watched a scene that contradicted 13 years of naval training. The surface of the tropical Pacific sparkled under harsh sunlight. 20 lifeboats bobbed like scattered toys. Motorized launches cut through gentle swells, all filled with human cargo. These were survivors from the transport vessel his submarine had just destroyed. In peacetime, such a sight would trigger automatic responses. Maritime law was clear. Ancient traditions of the sea demanded respect for survivors. Submarines withdrew after successful attacks. They left the drowning to their fate, or to rescue vessels. But this was not peacetime. These waters belonged to neither ally nor enemy. Total War had rewritten the rules of engagement. Morton stood poised to issue commands that would transform submarine tactics forever. The crew of USS Wahoo remained frozen at battle stations, 79 men who had trained extensively for torpedo attacks. This situation had never appeared in their manuals. The submarine floated on the surface, vulnerable but powerful. Her batteries required recharging after the morning's high-speed chase and attack on the 5,447-ton Bayomaru. None of the American sailors knew the full truth about their victims. Among the desperate figures crowding those small boats were 195 Indian prisoners of war, Allied soldiers captured during Singapore's catastrophic fall. Men being transported like cattle to slave labor camps in New Guinea's jungle interior. The mathematics of total warfare were about to be calculated not in strategy rooms or planning sessions. They would be written in machine gun fire across warm Pacific waters. Blood would mix with seawater under the tropical sun. The transformation of Dudley Walker Morton had begun decades earlier. July 17, 1907, in Owensboro, Kentucky marked his entry into the world. The infant, who would become America's most aggressive submarine commander, drew his first breath 1,000 miles from any ocean. Landlocked Kentucky seemed an unlikely birthplace for a naval legend. His father worked as a merchant in their small town. The elder Morton sold dry goods and hardware to farming families. He counted receipts and managed inventory. He never imagined his son would command one of the most sophisticated war machines ever constructed. The boy showed no early signs of his future calling to the sea. Morton entered the United States Naval Academy's gates in June 1926. His class would suffer more combat deaths than any since the Civil War's bloody conclusion. War clouds were already gathering across the Pacific, though few recognized the approaching storm. The young midshipman stood 6 feet tall with an imposing physical presence. His hands were massive, capable of crushing a man's grip in greeting. His jaw jutted forward prominently, earning him the nickname Mushmouth after a popular comic strip character. Classmates found the name fitting for his aggressive personality. On the wrestling mat, Morton dominated opponents through sheer determination. Football provided another outlet for his competitive nature. He threw himself into contact sports with frightening intensity. Coaches noted his refusal to accept defeat, even when clearly outmatched. But classroom instruction revealed Morton's true calling. While other midshipmen studied defensive maneuvers and cautious tactics, Morton obsessed over attack patterns. He calculated torpedo spread angles late into the night. He memorized range tables and firing solutions. Instructors began to notice this unusual focus on aggressive tactics. Commissioned as an ensign in June 1930, Morton initially served aboard surface vessels. The aircraft carrier USS Saratoga provided his first taste of fleet operations. The massive ship carried dozens of aircraft and thousands of crew members. Morton learned the complexities of coordinating air operations with surface movements. His next assignment brought him to the heavy cruiser USS Chicago. The powerful warship mounted 8-inch guns in armored turrets. Morton studied surface gunnery and navigation. He learned to handle large vessels in formation maneuvers. But surface warfare felt constraining to his aggressive temperament. In 1933, Lieutenant Junior Grade Morton reported to the submarine base at New London, Connecticut. Here he would discover his destiny in the claustrophobic steel cylinders that hunted beneath ocean waves. The submarine school challenged every aspect of his training and personality. Instructors at the submarine training facility immediately noticed Morton's unconventional approach to tactical problems. Traditional doctrine emphasized caution above all else. Submarines were scouts and observers. They gathered intelligence and avoided detection. They struck from ambush and immediately retreated to safety. Morton advocated direct confrontation. He proposed surface attacks in daylight. He suggested pursuing destroyers rather than fleeing from them. His training officer, Commander James, wrote detailed evaluations of the unusual young officer. Lieutenant Morton possesses an aggressive spirit rarely seen in submarine candidates. This trait will serve him well during wartime operations. However, it must be carefully balanced with sound judgment and tactical awareness. Morton's superiors recognized both his potential and his dangers. Morton's pre-war career carried him through the Asiatic Fleet's various assignments. He served aboard the submarine tender USS Canopus, learning the complex logistics of supporting underwater operations. The tender carried spare parts, torpedoes, fuel, and provisions for entire submarine squadrons. Morton studied every aspect of submarine maintenance and supply. His assignment to submarine S-37 provided his first experience aboard an actual combat vessel. The aging submarine patrolled waters around the Philippine Islands. These same waters would later become Morton's primary hunting grounds. He learned the currents, weather patterns, and tactical challenges of the Western Pacific. Morton returned to America in 1937 by way of Siberia and Europe. This unusual routing gave him unique insights into the militarization occurring across both continents. He witnessed German naval expansion and Soviet industrial mobilization. He understood that major war was approaching faster than most Americans realized. At the Philadelphia Navy Yard, Morton studied the new fleet submarines under construction. These vessels were larger, faster, and more heavily armed than anything previously built. They carried 24 torpedoes and mounted deck guns for surface combat. Morton recognized these boats as the future of submarine warfare. By 1939, Lieutenant Morton served as executive officer aboard the destroyer USS Fairfax. Surface combat tactics learned during this assignment would later revolutionize his submarine operations. He studied how destroyers hunted submarines and developed countermeasures for each technique. When Morton assumed command of submarine R-5 in August 1940, he had already formulated his personal philosophy of underwater warfare. A handmade sign appeared in the control room reading, "We will take the fight to the enemy." Crew members noticed their new captain's aggressive attitude immediately. December 7, 1941, changed the entire strategic landscape. Within hours of Pearl Harbor's devastating attack, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Harold Stark issued revolutionary orders: execute unrestricted air and submarine warfare against Japan. This single directive overturned decades of American naval doctrine and international maritime law. Lieutenant Commander Morton, recently promoted on October 15, 1942, was stationed at Mare Island Navy Yard in California. He supervised construction of new submarines, while the Navy desperately sought aggressive commanders to replace those proving too cautious in combat. Statistics from 1942 revealed the extent of submarine ineffectiveness. Of 363 submarine patrols conducted during the war's first year, most returned with unfired torpedoes. Captains proved unable or unwilling to press attacks against Japanese forces. Cautious approaches and maximum-range shots resulted in frequent misses and wasted opportunities. Morton received orders to Pearl Harbor as a prospective commanding officer. His first assignment involved nominal command of USS Dolphin while she underwent extensive repairs. But Dolphin was old, slow, and unsuited to Morton's aggressive tactical concepts. He needed a more capable platform for his revolutionary ideas. His opportunity arrived when Lieutenant Commander Marvin Kennedy, commanding officer of USS Wahoo, proved insufficiently aggressive during his second patrol. Navy leadership decided Kennedy required replacement. Morton would get his chance to prove aggressive tactics could succeed where cautious approaches had failed. Between November 8 and December 26, 1942, Morton sailed aboard Wahoo as prospective commanding officer. He observed Kennedy's methodical, cautious approach to submarine warfare. Kennedy approached enemy vessels carefully, attacked from maximum possible range, and immediately dove deep after firing torpedoes. Morton watched these conservative tactics with barely concealed frustration. He confided his thoughts to fellow officer Lieutenant Richard O'Kane. "We're fighting this war like we're afraid to get our paint scratched. Enemy vessels escape because we're too cautious. Aggressive action wins battles, not careful maneuvering." On December 31, 1942, at Brisbane, Australia, command of USS Wahoo officially transferred from Kennedy to Morton. His first act involved gathering the entire crew in the forward torpedo room. Unlike the formal, distant Kennedy, Morton spoke with direct, personal intensity. "Wahoo is expendable," he announced to the startled crew members. "We will take every reasonable precaution to preserve this vessel and your lives. But our primary mission remains sinking enemy ships wherever we find them. We're going to pursue them aggressively across every ocean." The crew exchanged uncertain glances throughout the cramped compartment. No submarine commander had ever spoken with such directness about expendability. Submarines were valuable assets requiring careful preservation, not weapons to be thrown recklessly into combat situations. But Morton's address continued with even more shocking declarations. "We're not going to run from destroyers like whipped dogs. We're going to attack them head-on. When enemy aircraft appear, we'll fight on the surface until forced to dive. Every encounter will be pressed to decisive conclusion." He produced hand-painted signs bearing crude red lettering. "Shoot the sons of bitches," they declared in bold characters. Morton personally posted these throughout the submarine's various compartments. The transformation of USS Wahoo from cautious scout to aggressive hunter had officially begun. Morton's revolutionary approach to submarine warfare became immediately apparent through tactical innovations. Traditional doctrine placed the commanding officer at the periscope during all attacks. The captain observed targets, calculated firing solutions, and issued torpedo firing commands from the conning tower. Morton stationed his executive officer Dick O'Kane at the periscope while Morton coordinated attacks from a central position. This system required complete faith in subordinate officers that few submarine captains could muster. But the arrangement freed Morton to absorb information from multiple sources simultaneously. Sound bearings, torpedo data, computer readings, ship positions, and damage reports all flowed through Morton's consciousness. He processed this information and made split-second tactical decisions while O'Kane provided continuous target observations. The innovation proved devastatingly effective in combat situations. The changes extended far beyond tactical arrangements. Morton eliminated rigid formality that characterized most submarine operations. He learned every crew member's name, their hometowns, their personal concerns and family situations. This personal approach created unprecedented loyalty and motivation. Yeoman Forrest Sterling, who also served as lookout, later recalled Morton's leadership style with admiration. Captain Morton moved through the boat at all hours, checking on individual crew members, asking about their families back home. He made us feel like we were the finest submarine crew in the entire Pacific Fleet. We were determined to prove him absolutely right. January 16, 1943, marked Wahoo's departure from Brisbane for her third war patrol under Morton's aggressive command. He had spent the entire refit period drilling his crew with relentless intensity. They practiced battle surfacing procedures until every movement became automatic muscle memory. Emergency surfacing with all weapons manned could be executed in under 30 seconds. Morton insisted every crew member understand basic operations outside their primary specialty area. Torpedo men learned radar operation procedures. Electricians practiced loading heavy torpedoes into tubes. This cross-training would prove crucial during combat's chaotic demands. The patrol area assigned to Wahoo was Wewak Harbor on New Guinea's northern coast. This major Japanese staging base was considered too dangerous for American submarines to approach closely. Previous boats had observed from safe distances, gathering intelligence while avoiding direct engagement with enemy forces. Morton had completely different tactical plans for this patrol area. On January 24th, he took Wahoo directly into the harbor's confined, shallow waters. The submarine's keel barely cleared the muddy bottom as she maneuvered between coral reefs and navigation hazards. At 800 hours, Morton's periscope revealed a destroyer nested alongside submarines at anchor. Rather than retreating to safer waters, Morton fired 3 torpedoes at the stationary target from close range. The torpedoes missed their intended target completely, alerting the entire Japanese base to Wahoo's presence. The destroyer immediately got underway, turning directly toward Wahoo's position with increasing speed. Standard submarine doctrine demanded immediate emergency dive and evasive maneuvering. Morton held his position, keeping Wahoo's bow pointed directly at the approaching enemy warship. "Range?" Morton asked with complete calmness. 1,200 yards and closing fast, O'Kane responded from the periscope. Morton waited patiently as the destroyer's bow wave became visible through the viewing glass. The enemy vessel was committed to ramming attack course. 800 yards, O'Kane announced with tension creeping into his voice. "Fire tube 5, Morton ordered. The single torpedo struck the destroyer amidships, breaking her back in a massive explosion that sent debris flying hundreds of feet into the tropical air. Through the periscope, O'Kane observed Japanese sailors being launched through the air like rag dolls. Over 100 men had been stationed as lookouts covering every inch of the destroyer's topside areas. The warship sank within minutes, taking most of her crew with her into the harbor's depths. Morton had proven that aggressive tactics could overcome superior Japanese anti-submarine defenses. Caution led to missed opportunities. boldness created devastating results against enemy forces. 2 days later, on January 26th, Wahoo's radar detected a large convoy northeast of New Guinea's coastline. Morton made the shocking decision to surface in broad daylight, using the submarine's superior surface speed to gain optimal attack position. This violated every principle of submarine warfare doctrine. Submarines were supposed to remain submerged during daylight hours in enemy-controlled waters. Surface exposure invited immediate air attack from Japanese patrol aircraft. But Morton understood that Japanese lookouts, conditioned to scan ocean surfaces for periscope feathers, often missed surface submarines at significant distances. The convoy consisted of 6 merchant vessels, with destroyer escorts maintaining protective formation. Morton tracked them through the morning hours, positioning Wahoo perfectly for maximum torpedo effectiveness. His patience and tactical skill were about to pay devastating dividends. At 11:30 hours, he fired 4 torpedoes at what appeared to be the convoy's largest transport vessel. Through the periscope, O'Kane watched the torpedo tracks race toward their target with deadly accuracy. The warhead struck home with tremendous force. The 5,447-ton Buyo Maru shuddered from the massive explosion, listed heavily to starboard, and began settling by the stern. Water poured through the gaping torpedo hole as the transport's death throes began. What followed would divide naval historians for decades to come. As Wahoo surfaced to recharge batteries depleted by the morning's high-speed chase, Morton observed approximately 20 boats evacuating the sinking transport vessel. Through powerful binoculars, he could see they were packed with soldiers in uniform, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of enemy troops heading directly for New Guinea's shores just miles away. Morton called his officers to the conning tower for an emergency consultation. "Gentlemen, we have developed a serious tactical situation," he announced grimly. "Those boats are filled with Japanese soldiers. If they reach the shoreline, they'll be killing Americans and Australians within a matter of days. What would you do in my position?" Executive Officer O'Kane spoke first with obvious reluctance. "International law prohibits attacking shipwrecked survivors, Captain. The rules of warfare are quite specific on this matter. Submarines must allow evacuation boats to proceed without interference. International law also prohibits unrestricted submarine warfare, which we've been conducting since Pearl Harbor," Morton responded sharply. "Those aren't shipwrecked survivors seeking rescue. They're enemy combatants using boats as improvised landing craft for immediate military operations." Engineering Officer George Grider wrestled visibly with his conscience before offering his opinion. "Sir, we don't know with certainty if they're all soldiers. There could be merchant crew members among them, possibly even prisoners of war. We should exercise caution." Morton's prominent jaw tightened with determination. "Every Japanese soldier who reaches New Guinea's shore means dead Americans in jungle fighting," he declared. "The Army Air Force bombs entire cities without distinguishing combatants from civilians. We are going to prevent these soldiers from reaching shore and reinforcing enemy positions." At approximately 1200 hours, Morton gave the order that would echo through naval history for generations. "Battle surface, man all weapons, prepare for surface engagement with enemy forces." The crew of Wahoo had trained extensively for this moment, but never for this specific purpose. They rushed to battle stations with practiced efficiency. The 4-inch deck gun was manned by experienced gunners. 2 20-millimeter cannons swiveled toward the target area. Multiple machine guns were loaded and aimed. Below deck, Yeoman Forrest Sterling stood watch as lookout, observing the unfolding scene with growing unease. He would later write in his published memoir about witnessing a man in one of the larger boats frantically waving something white above his head. It looked like a shirt or makeshift flag of surrender. The man was clearly trying to signal capitulation. Morton ordered a single warning shot fired from the deck gun into the water near the largest lifeboat. The response was immediate and decisive. Small arms fire from multiple boats peppered Wahoo's hull with rifle bullets. Several rounds struck the conning tower where Morton stood exposed. This return fire transformed the situation in Morton's tactical mind from potential rescue to active combat. "All weapons open fire," Morton commanded. For the next 30 to 45 minutes, Wahoo made systematic passes along the scattered line of evacuation boats. The 4-inch gun methodically destroyed larger motorized launches with high-explosive shells. Machine guns raked smaller lifeboats with continuous streams of ammunition. Through the chaos and gun smoke, individual moments stood out with terrible clarity. A swimmer approached Wahoo's steel hull, apparently attempting to climb aboard and surrender. When gunner's mate William White asked if they should take the man prisoner, Morton allegedly responded, "Hell no, I don't want the son of a bitch aboard my boat. Do you?" The machine guns continued their deadly work without pause. Sterling, watching from his lookout position, later described seeing bodies floating face down in the oil-slicked water. The tropical sea turned red around shattered boats and floating debris. Some men tried desperately to swim away from the carnage. Others clung to wreckage, hoping to avoid the searching guns. The weapons targeted them all without distinction between those who fought and those who attempted surrender. George Grider, stationed in the engineering spaces below, heard the continuous gunfire and felt the submarine shudder with each round from the 4-inch deck gun. In his memoir, War Fish, written 15 years after the war's end, he would struggle to reconcile the Morton he admired with the commander who ordered this controversial action. Mush was not a cruel man by nature, not a sadist who enjoyed causing suffering, Grider wrote. He was a fighter, absolutely determined to win this war by any means he considered necessary for victory. The moral complexities of total warfare had transformed a decent man into something harder and more ruthless. When the guns finally fell silent after their systematic work, no boats remained intact on the ocean's surface. Hundreds of bodies floated in the oil-slicked water among scattered debris and wreckage. Morton ordered Wahoo to clear the area immediately, pursuing the remaining convoy ships that had scattered during the attack. In his official patrol report, he would write with clinical detachment typical of military documentation, destroyed all boats, and estimated 1,500 to 6,000 enemy troops eliminated. The actual casualties, discovered only through post-war investigations, totaled 282 killed, including 195 Indian prisoners of war who had been Allied soldiers. News of Morton's controversial action spread through the submarine base at Pearl Harbor like wildfire when Wahoo returned on February 7, 1943. The submarine had decorated herself for the triumphant arrival with traditional symbols of successful patrols. A broom was lashed to the periscope shears, indicating a clean sweep of enemy vessels. Small Japanese flags were painted on the conning tower for each ship claimed sunk. But in the officers' club and torpedo workshop conversations, submariners discussed the lifeboat incident in hushed, uncertain tones. Some expressed admiration for Morton's aggressive tactics. Others questioned whether American submarines should engage in such actions, regardless of military necessity or tactical advantage. Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Pacific Fleet submarines, faced a delicate diplomatic and military situation. Morton had clearly violated international maritime law, potentially exposing captured American submariners to retaliation if the enemy learned of the incident. Yet Morton was also his most successful and inspiring commander, having revolutionized submarine tactics and transformed a timid force into aggressive hunters. Lockwood's solution demonstrated masterful bureaucratic navigation. He praised Morton's patrol results publicly while privately ensuring no official encouragement of similar controversial actions. The incident would be neither condemned nor celebrated, but quietly absorbed into the larger narrative of unrestricted submarine warfare. Captain John Brown, Lockwood's operations officer, interviewed Morton extensively about the incident according to declassified military records. Morton showed no remorse or regret, maintaining his position that preventing enemy troops from reaching shore constituted legitimate military action under total war conditions. Brown noted in his confidential report, "Commander Morton views this conflict as total war, without legal distinction between uniformed combatants and those temporarily utilizing boats for transportation." His tactical decisions flow from this philosophical framework rather than traditional maritime law considerations. The waters of the Pacific held secrets that would haunt the submarine service for decades. Ships carrying human cargo crossed these waters daily. Most carried prisoners of war. Many carried death. By the time peace returned to the Pacific, 134 vessels had crossed these dangerous waters. Their cargo was human. Their destination was often tragedy. More than 126,000 prisoners rode these floating coffins across hostile seas. American submarines prowled beneath the surface. Their commanders had no idea what lay in the holds above them. Torpedoes found their marks. Ships exploded and sank. The water swallowed everything. 19 ships went down this way. American submarines sent them to the bottom. The submarine's crews celebrated each sinking. They had no way of knowing the truth. 21,000 Allied prisoners died in those attacks. The tragedy of Buyo Maru was not unique. It happened again and again. Each incident added fresh horror to the war's growing list of atrocities. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision across the Pacific theater. Morton showed no remorse for what happened that day. His attitude hardened instead of softening. Public statements never came. Private doubts remained buried beneath layers of military necessity and wartime logic. His submarine became more aggressive after the lifeboat incident. Wahoo's 4th Patrol pushed deeper into enemy territory. Morton took his boat into the Yellow Sea. The waters there were shallow and treacherous. Japanese naval commanders believed these waters were impossible for submarines to navigate. They considered them natural barriers against underwater attack. Morton proved them wrong with devastating effectiveness. His submarine stalked through waters so shallow that the hull scraped bottom. Depth charges exploded close enough to shake loose every bolt on the boat. Still, Morton pressed forward. His determination bordered on obsession. 9 ships fell victim to his guns in these supposedly safe waters. Each sinking shattered Japanese confidence a little more. Their protected harbors offered no protection against American submarines willing to take extreme risks. The 5th Patrol took Wahoo into even more dangerous territory. The Sea of Japan beckoned like a forbidden prize. Japanese commanders called it the Emperor's Private Lake. No enemy vessel had ever penetrated these sacred waters and lived to tell about it. The homeland islands surrounded this body of water like protective arms. Minefields guarded every entrance. Patrol boats swept the surface constantly. Anti-submarine nets stretched across strategic narrows. The defenses seemed impenetrable. Morton didn't care about defenses. He saw opportunity where others saw suicide. Wahoo slipped through the heavily defended La Perouse Strait under cover of darkness. The submarine entered Japanese home waters like a wolf entering a sheep pen. 4 ships sank before the Japanese realized what had happened. Panic spread through the naval command. An American submarine was operating in their most protected waters. The psychological impact was enormous. Morton escaped through the same strait he had entered. Mines exploded around Wahoo as she made her desperate run for open ocean. The submarine scraped past underwater obstacles that would have destroyed lesser boats. They made it out alive. His reputation reached mythical proportions after this feat. Naval intelligence officers couldn't believe the patrol reports. One submarine had penetrated the Emperor's private waters and returned safely. It seemed impossible. Newspaper headlines screamed his exploits across America. They called him the one-man Navy. His photograph appeared on magazine covers. Hollywood wanted to make movies about his adventures. Morton had become larger than life. General MacArthur personally awarded him the Army Distinguished Service Cross. The ceremony took place in Brisbane with full military honors. Cameras captured every moment. Morton stood at attention as the medal was pinned to his chest, but close friends noticed changes in the submarine commander. George Grider saw him during a brief reunion in August 1943. The easy smile came less frequently now. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Something had changed deep inside. The Morton who returned from patrol seemed driven by forces he couldn't name or control. His laugh sounded forced when it came at all. Sleep appeared to elude him during shore leave. Nightmares visited him in the darkness. When Grider asked directly about the lifeboat incident, Morton's expression hardened instantly. His jaw clenched tight. His eyes looked away toward the horizon. The subject was clearly painful for him to discuss. We do what we have to do. That was all Morton would say about it. His voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before the third patrol. The words sounded like a man trying to convince himself of something. September 1943 arrived with orders for another patrol. Wahoo would return to the Sea of Japan for the 7th time under Morton's command. The submarine was scheduled to depart Pearl Harbor within the week. Before leaving, Morton sought out Dick O'Kane at the submarine base. O'Kane now commanded his own boat and was preparing for his first patrol as captain. The two officers had served together for months aboard Wahoo. Their conversation took place privately in Morton's quarters. No one else heard the words that passed between them. O'Kane later recalled the meeting with deep emotion. Morton seemed to sense something about the upcoming patrol. "If we don't make it back," Morton told his former executive officer quietly, "I want you to know you're the best exec I ever had. Take care of yourself." The words carried an ominous weight that troubled O'Kane for years afterward. October 11, 1943 arrived with clear skies and calm seas in the La Perouse Strait. Japanese naval records show precise details of what happened that day. An American submarine was detected trying to transit the heavily defended waterway. Aircraft appeared overhead within minutes of the detection. Bombs fell like deadly rain onto the submarine below. The water erupted in towering columns of spray and debris. A massive explosion followed the initial attack. Observers reported seeing a tremendous blast that sent debris flying hundreds of feet into the air. An oil slick spread across the surface like a black stain. Pieces of twisted metal floated among the oil and foam. USS Wahoo and all 79 hands disappeared beneath the waves that day. Morton was 36 years old when the ocean claimed him. His submarine became his tomb, along with every man who had followed him into those deadly waters. The Navy's response to Wahoo's loss revealed more through what it didn't say than what it did. Admiral Lockwood immediately recommended Morton for a posthumous Medal of Honor. The citation praised his revolutionary tactics and exceptional courage under fire. The recommendation moved through official channels with unusual speed. Morton's record of success seemed to guarantee approval. His innovations had transformed submarine warfare across the Pacific. His aggressive tactics had inspired an entire generation of submarine commanders. The recommendation was denied and downgraded to a Fourth Navy Cross. No official reason appeared in the paperwork. The decision came from the highest levels of naval command. The silence around the denial spoke volumes about hidden considerations. Naval historians studying the case decades later reached unanimous conclusions. The Buyo Maru incident had doomed Morton's Medal of Honor recommendation. The lifeboat's attack had stained his record permanently. Even death couldn't wash away that moral compromise. For 50 years, the incident remained buried in classified files. The official patrol report released to the public had been carefully sanitized. It mentioned only that Wahoo destroyed lifeboats containing enemy troops. The disturbing details stayed hidden from view. The duration of the attack remained classified. The methods used were never disclosed publicly. The number killed was locked away in secret files. The Navy protected Morton's reputation through official silence about the most controversial aspects of his career. When George Grider published his memoir, Warfish, in 1958, naval censors reviewed every page carefully. They required him to minimize the lifeboat incident to just a few vague paragraphs. The full story remained hidden from public scrutiny. The classification served multiple purposes for the Navy's public relations efforts. It protected Morton's family from unwanted controversy and media attention. It prevented Japanese propaganda from exploiting the incident for their own purposes. Most importantly, it avoided uncomfortable questions about American conduct during what historians called the Good War. The Navy preferred Morton be remembered as a heroic innovator rather than a controversial figure who had crossed ethical boundaries. Only in 1995 did the full details finally emerge through Freedom of Information Act requests. Most participants had died by then. Historians gained access to complete patrol reports, crew interviews, and post-war investigations for the first time. The revelations sparked renewed debate about submarine warfare ethics. Academic conferences devoted entire sessions to discussing the moral compromises of total war. The Morton case became a textbook example of wartime's capacity for moral corruption. Dr. Clay Blair, Jr., author of The Definitive Silent Victory. The U.S. submarine war against Japan struggled with how to present the incident fairly. His solution was to include it as one example among many of warfare's brutalizing effects on ordinary men. Blair's approach neither condemned nor condoned Morton's actions explicitly. He wrote that war transforms ordinary men into killers through psychological pressures that peacetime minds cannot fully comprehend. Morton was transformed more completely than most submarine commanders. The ethical implications of Morton's actions have divided historians and military ethicists for 8 decades since that January day. Those defending Morton point to several mitigating factors that complicate simple moral judgments about his conduct. The troops in the lifeboats were armed and had fired first at the submarine. They were heading toward shore to reinforce enemy positions. Morton operated within a war where both sides had abandoned traditional legal restrictions on military conduct. Professor Michael Walser addressed the Morton case indirectly in his influential work Just and Unjust Wars. He posed difficult questions about moral judgment in extreme circumstances. When survival itself is at stake, when the enemy has abandoned all restraints, can we judge those who respond in kind? The submarine war in the Pacific presented the hardest possible case for traditional military ethics. It was total war between racial enemies who viewed each other as fundamentally subhuman. Normal rules seemed inadequate for such extreme circumstances. Critics argue that regardless of wartime context, attacking helpless survivors violates fundamental human principles that transcend legal codes and military necessity. The presence of Indian prisoners, even though unknown to Morton, demonstrates the danger of abandoning discrimination between combatants and non-combatants completely. Once that crucial line between legitimate and illegitimate targets gets crossed, atrocity becomes inevitable. The logic of military necessity expands to justify increasingly brutal actions. There is no natural stopping point once the killing begins. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman identified the Morton incident as a clear example of moral injury in his psychological study on killing. This refers to actions that soldiers take during war that violate their peacetime ethical foundations permanently. Grossman argued that Morton's post-incident behavior showed classic symptoms of moral injury. His increased aggression, coupled with apparent depression, suggested deep psychological impact from crossing fundamental moral boundaries. The trauma was invisible but real. The submarine community itself remains divided about Morton's legacy even today. At the U.S. Navy Submarine School, the incident forms part of mandatory ethics training for new officers. Instructors use it to discuss tensions between military necessity and humanitarian law. The instructors carefully note that no clear answer exists to the dilemmas Morton faced. Each submarine commander must wrestle with these impossible questions individually. The Navy cannot provide simple answers to complex moral problems. The full human dimension of January 26, 1943, emerged only through painstaking post-war research by Japanese and Allied historians. Survivors from both sides provided testimony that revealed the complete scope of the tragedy decades after it occurred. Japanese survivor Petty Officer Hiroyuki Yamada spent 6 hours clinging to wreckage in the oil-slicked water. He provided crucial testimony about the attack in 1962. His account revealed details that official reports had omitted or minimized. "The submarine circled us like a shark hunting wounded prey," he recalled with vivid clarity. "We could see the Americans manning their guns on the deck. Some of our soldiers fired rifles at them. It was a stupid, desperate gesture that accomplished nothing. The big gun destroyed boat after boat with methodical precision. Men jumped into the water as their boats disintegrated around them. The machine guns found them there in the water too. There was nowhere to hide from the bullets." The Indian prisoners' stories proved even more heartbreaking when they finally emerged. Lance Corporal Ajit Khan was one of 565 Indians who survived the attack. His testimony revealed the cruel irony of their situation. "We thought the Americans had come to save us from Japanese captivity," Khan testified years later. "In Singapore, British officers had told us that Americans treated prisoners according to international law. When the shooting started, we couldn't believe what was happening. Some men stood up in the boats, with their hands raised high above their heads. They were trying to surrender to their supposed liberators. They died standing there with their arms in the air. The bullets cut them down without mercy." The Japanese had maintained meticulous records of their Indian prisoners. They intended to use these men for propaganda purposes if they could be persuaded to join the Japanese cause against Britain. These records revealed personal details that humanized the tragedy completely. Among the dead Indians were men with names, families, and futures that were cut short. Havildar Pragat Ram was 28 years old and had 3 young children waiting for him in Punjab. Sepoy Mohan Lal was only 19 and had joined the army to escape grinding rural poverty. Nayak Gurdit Singh was 35 years old and had won commendations for exceptional bravery during the Malayan campaign. He had distinguished himself in combat against Japanese forces. Now he died under American guns in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. On the Japanese side, the 366 soldiers from the 26th Field Ordnance Depot were mostly young conscripts. Their average age was 22 years old. Most had been drafted from rural villages and small towns across Japan. Their commander was Major Yoshiro Tanaka. He left behind a widow and two small children in a farming village outside Tokyo. Witnesses saw him trying to maintain military order in the boats, even as Wahoo's guns opened fire around them. His body was never recovered from the sea. The ripple effects of that day extended far beyond the immediate casualties. Families across India and Japan waited for news that would never come. The dead had simply vanished into the Pacific without explanation or closure. The Indian prisoners were officially listed as missing and presumed dead. Their families received no details about what had actually happened to their sons, fathers, and brothers. Military bureaucracy provided minimal information to avoid diplomatic complications. Only in 1947 did the British government finally notify next of kin about their losses. Even then, the notifications provided sparse details to avoid creating problems with newly independent India and Pakistan. The families deserved better information than they received. Despite all the controversy surrounding the lifeboat incident, Morton's aggressive tactics had transformed American submarine warfare completely. Before Morton's example, Pacific Fleet submarines had averaged only 0.5 ships sunk per patrol. This performance was embarrassingly low. After Morton demonstrated what aggressive leadership could achieve, that average tripled almost immediately. Submarine commanders, who had been cautious and defensive, became hunters stalking Japanese shipping. The entire submarine service found its voice and confidence. Admiral Lockwood noted the transformation in his classified war diary. "Morton has shown our commanders what is truly possible with proper aggressive tactics," he wrote. "His methods, while sometimes ethically questionable, have revolutionized our entire approach to submarine warfare. We are no longer a timid force hiding from enemy destroyers," Lockwood continued. "We have become predators, hunting Japanese shipping across the entire Pacific Ocean." The change in attitude has been remarkable and immediate. The statistical evidence supported Lockwood's assessment completely. In 1942, American submarines had sunk only 180 Japanese ships total. In 1943, following Morton's revolutionary example, they destroyed 335 enemy vessels. By 1944, American submarines were sinking Japanese ships faster than Japanese shipyards could replace them. The maritime island nation that depended entirely on imports for survival was being systematically strangled by fewer than 300 American submarines. These submarines operated from bases at Pearl Harbor and Australia. They covered the entire Pacific Ocean from the Aleutian Islands to the Solomon Islands. Japanese merchant shipping faced constant attack across thousands of miles of ocean. Morton's specific tactical innovations became standard operating doctrine throughout the submarine force. The practice of having executive officers man the periscope during surface attacks was adopted fleet-wide. This freed the captain to coordinate the overall attack. Surface attacks conducted in broad daylight had been considered suicide before Morton's example. After Wahoo proved it could be done successfully, daytime surface attacks became routine throughout the Pacific submarine force. Most importantly, Morton's fundamental attitude that submarines were offensive weapons rather than defensive scouts permeated the entire submarine service. This psychological transformation was perhaps his greatest contribution to Allied victory. Commander Lawson Ramage conducted a legendary surface night attack that earned him the Medal of Honor. He explicitly credited Morton's example for inspiring his own aggressive tactics. The psychological influence was direct and measurable. "I thought of mush up there on Wahoo's bridge," Ramage recalled, never flinching as Japanese destroyers charged straight at him. If Morton could maintain his courage under such pressure, so could I. The example was infectious throughout the service. Ramage sank 5 Japanese ships in a single night attack. His performance matched Morton's audacity, even if it avoided Morton's ethical transgressions. The aggressive spirit spread from submarine to submarine across the Pacific Fleet. In October 2006, a Russian deep-sea diving team made a discovery that renewed international interest in Morton's story. They located Wahoo's wreck in La Perouse Strait, lying 213 feet below the surface in the cold, dark water. The submarine lay broken into 3 distinct sections. This provided clear evidence of the catastrophic explosion that had destroyed her. The damage was consistent with a direct hit from Japanese aircraft bombs, followed by internal explosions. The bow section containing the forward torpedo room remained surprisingly intact. This was where Morton had first addressed his crew about aggressive tactics. Inside this section lay the remains of 79 American sailors who had followed their captain to their deaths. The discovery of Wahoo's wreck sparked renewed international interest in Morton's career and the Buyo Maru incident. Japanese researchers gained access to previously classified archives that revealed disturbing new information about the submarine's final patrol. Evidence emerged that the Imperial Japanese Navy had specifically targeted Wahoo for destruction. They had codenamed the operation Vengeance for Buyo. Radio intercepts suggested that Japanese naval intelligence knew exactly which American submarine they were hunting in October 1943. The targeting appeared to be personal retaliation for the lifeboat attack rather than routine anti-submarine operations. Japanese commanders had marked Morton and his submarine for special attention. They wanted revenge for the humiliation he had inflicted on their forces. Even more disturbing discoveries emerged about the Indian prisoners who had died in the attack. Research by Indian military historian Dr. Pratap Singh revealed that several prisoners had attempted to signal their identity to Wahoo during the attack itself. Members of the 2nd Battalion, 16th Punjab Regiment spoke fluent English from their service in the British Indian Army. They had tried desperately to shout their identity and Allied status to the American submarine crew. The machine gun fire was too loud for voices to carry across the water. The distance between the submarine and lifeboats was too great for clear communication. Their desperate attempts to identify themselves as Allied prisoners failed completely. Morton and his crew had no way of hearing these identification attempts over the noise of battle. The tragic irony was that Allied soldiers were trying to surrender to other Allied forces, while Japanese guards shot back at the Americans. When presented with evidence about unmarked prisoner transports violating international law, the Japanese government offered no official apology. Foreign Ministry spokesman Hiroshi Yamamoto stated tersely in 2007 that wartime events were tragic for all sides involved. Japan has acknowledged its wartime responsibilities in appropriate international forums, Yamamoto continued. The government considers historical issues to have been resolved through existing treaties and agreements. No further comment would be forthcoming. The Indian government has never issued any official statement about the loss of these soldiers. The men who died under American guns while wearing British uniforms remain forgotten by the nations they served. Their sacrifice has been erased from official memory. Morton's legacy remains irreducibly complex and controversial 8 decades after his death. The United States Navy continues to honor him as one of its greatest submarine commanders in official histories and training materials. USS Morton, destroyer DD-948, was commissioned in 1959 and bore his name with pride until decommissioning in 1990. The ship served with distinction during the Cold War. Morton's name sailed the oceans for 3 decades after his death. At the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Morton Hall houses visiting dignitaries and special guests. His portrait hangs in the Submarine School at New London. His aggressive tactics are still studied at the Naval War College as examples of successful military innovation. Yet, the Buyo Maru incident cannot be erased from his record, no matter how many honors accumulate. In 2003, when the Navy considered naming a new attack submarine after Morton, significant protests arose from unexpected quarters. Human rights organizations and Indian American groups mounted campaigns opposing the naming. They argued that honoring Morton would glorify war crimes and disrespect the innocent victims who died under his guns. The controversy grew heated quickly. Naval leadership was forced to reconsider the naming decision under pressure from Congress and the media. The submarine was eventually named USS Texas instead. The controversy demonstrated that Morton's actions remained divisive even 60 years later. George Grider, who knew Morton better than almost anyone else, spent his final years wrestling with his former commander's complex legacy. The moral questions never left him during his long retirement from naval service. In a 1988 interview conducted just 3 years before his death, Grider offered his most honest assessment of the man he had served under. His words carried the weight of decades spent thinking about those terrible minutes in the Pacific. Mush was the bravest man I ever knew, and the most effective submarine commander of the entire war, Grider said slowly. But what happened that day with the lifeboats haunts me still. We became something we weren't supposed to be as American naval officers. We crossed a line that should never be crossed by civilized military forces, Grider continued. The enemy's conduct doesn't justify abandoning our own moral standards. We lost something important that day that we never got back. Dick O'Kane inherited Morton's aggressive spirit and became the war's most successful submarine commander by tonnage sunk. He defended Morton's memory until his own death, never wavering in his loyalty to his former captain. In O'Kane's final public interview in 1993, he insisted that wartime judgments required wartime context. War is not a game played by peacetime rules, he stated firmly. The Japanese started this conflict with a treacherous sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. They tortured and murdered American prisoners throughout the Pacific theater. O'Kane continued, Mush did what he believed was necessary to win the war and save American lives. Judge him by the moral standards of that time, not by comfortable peacetime morality. Morton's actions, while exceptional in American submarine warfare, were part of a broader pattern of escalating brutality throughout the Pacific theater. American submarines operated under orders that would have been unthinkable before Pearl Harbor changed everything. Japanese submarines committed documented atrocities that dwarfed Morton's single incident. Both sides had systematically abandoned the traditional laws of civilized warfare in favor of racial annihilation and total victory at any cost. By war's end, American submarines had sunk 1,814 Japanese vessels, totaling over 5.3 million tons of shipping. This represented 55% of all Japanese maritime losses during the entire war. The submarine force had strangled Japan's maritime lifelines completely. They achieved this remarkable success while suffering the highest casualty rate of any American military service. 22% of submarine personnel were killed in action. 52 submarines were lost, along with 3,506 men who never returned home. The submarine force comprised just 2% of total Navy personnel, but accounted for 55% of Japanese maritime losses. This extraordinary effectiveness came at both human and moral costs that extended far beyond casualty statistics. These impressive statistics came at a moral price that historians are still calculating decades later. Beyond Morton's notorious incident, American submarines routinely left enemy survivors to drown rather than risk capture or compromise operational security. They attacked hospital ships suspected of carrying military supplies in violation of international law. They laid mines in coastal waters used by fishing boats and civilian ferries. Total war had meant total abandonment of discrimination between military and civilian targets. The Japanese submarine force operated with even fewer moral restrictions than their American counterparts. Beyond well-documented atrocities against survivors of attacked ships, Japanese submarines conducted primitive biological warfare attacks on the American mainland. They planned, though never successfully executed, attacks on the Panama Canal, using aircraft carrying plague-infected fleas as biological weapons. In this context of completely unlimited warfare, Morton's actions appear less aberrant, though no less morally troubling. Contemporary military ethicists studying the Morton case at professional military education institutions reach widely conflicting conclusions about the moral lessons to be drawn from his actions. Context matters enormously in their analyses. The U.S. Naval War College's Ethics Department incorporates the incident into its required curriculum for all students. They present officers with Morton's exact scenario: enemy troops in lifeboats heading toward nearby shores to rejoin the fight. Student responses vary dramatically based on their combat experience and cultural backgrounds. Officers with recent combat deployments tend to be more sympathetic to Morton's position. Those without combat experience are more likely to condemn his actions unconditionally. Captain James Campbell, who teaches military ethics at the Naval Academy, observes that Morton represents the eternal tension between winning wars and maintaining moral authority. He was supremely effective at sinking enemy ships and killing enemy personnel. But military effectiveness without ethical constraints leads inevitably to barbarism, Campbell warns his students. We study Morton's case to understand where moral lines exist and why they matter for professional military officers. International humanitarian law has evolved significantly since 1943 in direct response to World War II atrocities. The 1949 Geneva Conventions explicitly protect shipwreck survivors regardless of their military status or potential threat to attacking forces. The 1977 additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions further strengthen these protections and clarify obligations toward prisoners of war and civilian populations. Modern legal frameworks provide clearer guidance than existed during Morton's era. Yet enforcement of international humanitarian law remains problematic in contemporary asymmetric conflicts, where non-state actors operate completely outside established legal frameworks. Modern submarine commanders face similar moral dilemmas updated for current technology and threats. Should an attack submarine torpedo a vessel suspected of carrying terrorists if civilians are known to be aboard? What level of certainty is required before engaging targets in populated areas? The Morton precedent offers no easy answers. His case provides only the sobering warning that actions taken in war's heat can define a military legacy forever. Momentary decisions made under extreme pressure echo through decades of historical judgment and moral evaluation. Forrest Sterling served as Wahoo's yeoman and witnessed the lifeboat attack from the submarine's bridge. He lived until 2002 and carried the memory of that day for nearly 60 years after the war ended. In his memoir, Wake of the Wahoo, published in 1999, Sterling provided perhaps the most brutally honest assessment of the incident and its lasting psychological impact on those who participated in it. I was 21 years old, standing lookout watch while we methodically killed those men in the boats, Sterling wrote with painful honesty. I saw one Japanese soldier trying to surrender with a white cloth tied to a broken oar. I've lived with that image for 60 years. Captain Morton was unquestionably a great submarine commander who made us the most feared and effective submarine in the Pacific Fleet, Sterling continued. But what we did that day was morally wrong. We knew it was wrong even while we were doing it. But we followed orders anyway, because Morton commanded it. And we trusted his judgment completely, Sterling reflected. People ask me if I hate Morton for making me complicit in that killing. I don't hate him. He was trying to win the war the only way he understood. The real crime was the war itself, Sterling concluded. It transformed good men like Morton into efficient killers, and then celebrated them as national heroes for sending thousands of enemy personnel to their deaths in the ocean depths. Then we act morally outraged when he killed men floating helplessly in lifeboats, Sterling observed with bitter irony. The truth is that submarine warfare was always fundamentally about killing defenseless people trapped inside steel hulls underwater. Every merchant ship we torpedoed was filled with sailors who never had any chance to fight back or escape, he continued. We just didn't have to watch their faces as they drowned. That day with the lifeboats we had to watch. We had to participate directly. We saw the individual faces of the men we were killing, Sterling wrote. That's the only real difference between what we did that day and what we did every other day of the war. Usually we could maintain psychological distance from our victims. The final statistical accounting of January 26, 1943, emerged only through painstaking post-war research by military historians accessing classified documents decades after the participants had died. Buyo Maru carried 1,026 total personnel when Wahoo's torpedoes found her. The ship's manifest listed 366 Japanese soldiers from the 26th Field Ordnance Depot and 760 Indian prisoners from the 2nd Battalion, 16th Punjab Regiment. The attack on survivors in lifeboats killed 195 Indian prisoners and 87 Japanese soldiers. Total deaths from gunfire numbered 282 human beings. These men died not from the torpedo attack, but from deliberate machine gun and cannon fire directed at lifeboats. Japanese rescue vessels eventually picked up 844 survivors from the water. Most suffered from exposure, dehydration, and various injuries sustained during the prolonged attack. Many carried psychological trauma that lasted for decades afterward. Wahoo's third patrol statistics showed the gap between claims and reality that characterized submarine warfare reporting. Morton claimed 8 ships sunk during the patrol. Post-war analysis confirmed only 4 actual sinkings, including Buyo Maru. Tonnage claimed reached 32,000 tons of enemy shipping destroyed. Actual confirmed tonnage totaled approximately 16,000 tons. The inflation was typical of submarine war patrols, where verification was difficult and crews naturally overestimated their success. Ammunition expended specifically on the lifeboats included 20 rounds from the 4-inch deck gun and approximately 2,000 rounds of 20mm cannon fire. An unknown number of thousands of machine gun rounds were also fired at the survivors. The engagement with lifeboats lasted between 30 and 45 minutes, according to various crew accounts. The distance to the nearest land was estimated at 3 to 5 miles. Most survivors could potentially have reached shore if left unmolested. Morton's complete career statistics as a submarine commander encompassed 5 war patrols aboard Wahoo. He commanded her 3rd through 7th patrols until his death in October 1943. His tenure lasted less than 1 year. Ships confirmed sunk under his command totaled 19 vessels representing 55,000 tons of enemy shipping. He spent 138 days on patrol during his brief but intensive command period. His effectiveness per day at sea was extraordinary by any measure. The crew members lost under Morton's command numbered 79. This represented the entire complement aboard Wahoo during her final 7th patrol. Every man who sailed with Morton on that last mission died with him in La Perouse Strait. The wreck of USS Wahoo lies today in international waters between Japan and Russia. The submarine has become an iron tomb for 79 Americans who followed their charismatic commander into both legend and death beneath the Pacific waves. No effort has ever been made to recover the bodies from the wreck. The submarine is officially considered a war grave under international maritime law. It remains protected by treaty from salvage operations or unauthorized disturbance. In 2008, a joint American-Japanese maritime expedition placed memorial plaques at the wreck site. The ceremonies included representatives from both nations' navies. The gesture represented a symbolic reconciliation between former enemies. The American memorial plaque reads simply, "To the brave men of USS Wahoo, still on eternal patrol." The Japanese plaque memorializes all who died in the waters between the two nations during the long Pacific War. Neither memorial plaque mentions the Indian prisoners who died on January 26, 1943. These men remain forgotten casualties, caught between empires in a global war that was not of their own making. Their sacrifice has been erased from official memory. Morton's widow Harriet lived until 1979 without ever remarrying. She carefully preserved Morton's personal letters throughout the decades, but never discussed their contents publicly. The private thoughts of the controversial submarine commander remained private. After Harriet's death, the letters were donated to the Naval Historical Center with strict legal stipulations. They will remain sealed from public and scholarly access until 2043, exactly 100 years after Morton's death in combat. What final thoughts Morton shared with his wife about the war, his actions, and his moral struggles remain completely unknown. The letters may contain his private reflections on the lifeboat incident, but researchers must wait decades to discover the truth. The last surviving Wahoo crew member from the pre-Morton patrol period was motor machinist's mate Andrew Lennox. He died in 2019 at the age of 98, having transferred off Wahoo just weeks before the infamous Buyo Maru incident occurred. Lennox had served under the previous captain and experienced Morton's transformation of the submarine's culture firsthand. Asked about Morton in his final interview, Lennox provided a balanced assessment that captured the complexity of the man. Mush Morton was simultaneously the finest submarine commander who ever lived and the most dangerous man I ever encountered, Lennox reflected. Thank God I wasn't aboard for his 3rd patrol. I don't think I could have lived with participating in what they did that day. The story of USS Wahoo's attack on lifeboat survivors forces contemporary Americans to confront deeply uncomfortable truths about warfare's capacity to corrupt even the most professional and ethical military forces operating under extreme pressure. Morton didn't act from personal cruelty, sadism, or racial hatred toward his victims. His actions stemmed from a coldly logical extension of total war's fundamental premises. If the enemy must be completely destroyed, why not destroy him when he's most vulnerable? Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton crossed a moral line that day in waters north of New Guinea. It was a line clearly drawn by international maritime law, centuries of naval tradition, and basic standards of human decency that transcend legal codes. He crossed that line believing sincerely that military necessity justified his actions. He convinced himself that saving American lives in future battles required killing Japanese soldiers immediately, even when they posed no direct threat to his submarine or crew. The 195 Indian prisoners who died alongside those Japanese soldiers stand today as permanent testimony to the terrible danger inherent in such utilitarian moral logic, applied in wartime conditions where information is incomplete and decisions irreversible. The submarine force that Morton inspired through his revolutionary aggressive tactics went on to systematically strangle Japan's maritime lifelines. They contributed decisively to Allied victory in the Pacific theater through their destruction of enemy shipping. His tactical innovations revolutionized underwater warfare and inspired an entire generation of submarine commanders to abandon caution in favor of aggressive hunting of enemy vessels. The psychological transformation was as important as any technical advancement. Yet Morton's historical legacy remains forever shadowed by those 30 to 45 terrible minutes when American naval power revealed its capacity for acts that peacetime morality unconditionally condemns as criminal and barbaric. In the final analysis, both the Japanese, who never expected American submarines to deliberately fire on helpless survivors, and the Indians, who never expected their liberators to kill them, learned that total war inevitably transforms all participants. Morton proved conclusively that American submariners could demonstrate the same ruthless efficiency as any warriors in human history when they believed survival and victory required abandoning traditional moral constraints on military conduct. Whether Morton's actions were militarily necessary, morally justified, or criminally inexcusable remains a question that each new generation must answer based on their own understanding of warfare's moral dimensions and human costs. USS Wahoo rests today 213 feet beneath the surface of La Perouse Strait. The submarine holds the mortal remains of 79 Americans who followed their controversial commander into history's darkest moral waters without questioning his judgment. They remain on eternal patrol beneath the waves, serving as a permanent reminder that warfare's greatest casualty is often our shared humanity. Some moral lines, once crossed under pressure, can never be uncrossed through subsequent justification or historical context. The 282 men who died in the Pacific waters that January day included Japanese soldiers and Indian prisoners. They were men with families and futures, dreams and fears. They became casualties not just of war itself, but of war's terrible logic taken to its ultimate conclusion. This represents Morton's truest historical legacy. Not merely the enemy ships he sank or the tactical innovations he pioneered, but the eternal moral question his actions pose about what civilized nations are willing to do to achieve victory in warfare. The question remains whether any military victory can be worth achieving through methods that fundamentally destroy the moral principles that nations claim to defend when they choose to fight wars in the first place.